The Cincinnati skyline was barely visible through the November rain that hammered against the workshop windows. Fat droplets raced down the glass, distorting the city lights into blurred streaks of amber and white. Inside the cramped space on Vine Street, Marcus Chen sat hunched over a workbench cluttered with broken violins, their bodies split open like wounded birds. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed incessantly, a soundtrack to his mounting frustration. He pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to massage away the headache that had become his constant companion over the past 3 months. The mahogany violin in front of him was a disaster. The sound post had collapsed, the bridge had warped beyond repair, and there was a crack running along the top plate that would require complete reconstruction. Mrs. Henderson's 1920s German instrument, passed down through 3 generations, now looked more like kindling than a musical treasure. "Even a miracle won't fix this," Marcus muttered, his voice barely audible over the rain. He'd said those words before, but never about something that mattered this much. Mrs. Henderson was counting on him. Her granddaughter's audition for the Cincinnati Conservatory was in 6 weeks. This violin was supposed to be her secret weapon, the instrument that would carry her family's musical legacy forward. Marcus stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghosting over the rain-soaked cityscape. At 38, he looked older than his years. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his black hair, usually neat, stuck up at odd angles from running his hands through it. His father's leather apron hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight since the accident. The accident, even thinking about it, sent a jolt of phantom pain through his right hand. 6 months ago, a delivery truck had run a red light at the intersection of Reading Road and Seymour Avenue. Marcus had been crossing with a client's vintage Stradivarius copy. The violin had survived. His hand hadn't fared as well. 3 broken fingers, damaged nerves, and months of physical therapy later, he could hold tools. But the fine motor control he'd spent 20 years developing was gone. His workshop, Chen's Instrument Restoration, had once been the go-to place for serious musicians in the greater Cincinnati area. Word had spread from the music department at the University of Cincinnati to the orchestras, from teachers to students. Marcus had inherited his father's gift for coaxing broken instruments back to life, but gifts meant nothing when your hands wouldn't cooperate. The door chime rang, startling him from his thoughts. He turned to see a woman stepping inside, shaking water from a bright yellow raincoat. She was maybe in her mid-30s, with shoulder-length auburn hair darkened by the rain and green eyes that took in the workshop with obvious interest. She carried a violin case under her arm, protected from the weather. "Are you still open?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight southern lilt. "I saw the light on, but the sign says you close at 6. Marcus glanced at the clock. 7:15. He'd lost track of time again. "I'm sorry, I forgot to flip the sign, but if you need something, I can try to help." She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely warm. "I'm not a customer, actually. I'm Elena Rodriguez. I'm a luthier from Nashville. I just moved to Cincinnati last week to be closer to my sister." She set her case down carefully on one of the few clear spots on the counter. "I've been looking for workshop space, and someone at the music store on Main Street said you might be willing to rent out some room. Said you used to have an apprentice here." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "That was a long time ago." "Oh," Elena's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to assume. If you're not interested, I understand. I just thought—" "I'm not taking on anyone right now," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended. "I can barely keep up with my own work." Elena's gaze drifted to the workbench, taking in the dismantled violins, the scattered tools, the half-finished repairs. Her eyes lingered on his right hand, and Marcus instinctively curled his fingers, hiding the subtle tremor that appeared when he was tired. When she looked back at his face, there was understanding there, not pity. which somehow made it worse. "I get it," she said quietly. "I really do, but I wasn't asking for a mentorship or anything like that. Just some bench space and access to tools I can't afford yet. I'd pay rent, of course, and I'm good at what I do. Won a few restoration awards back in Tennessee." She paused. "I noticed the Henderson violin. That's tricky work." Marcus followed her gaze to the broken instrument. "It's beyond tricky. It's impossible." "Nothing's impossible, just challenging." Eleanor stepped closer to the bench, her professional interest clearly overriding social boundaries. "May I?" Before Marcus could refuse, she'd pulled a pair of glasses from her pocket and leaned over the violin, examining it with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely cared. Her fingers hovered over the crack, tracing its path without touching. The grain split along a weak point, probably from humidity changes. "The soundpost failure is secondary. You'd need to stabilize the crack first, use hide glue, clamp it properly with spool clamps to match the arch. The bridge is shot, but that's easy enough to replace. And the soundpost—" She straightened up, meeting his eyes. "You'd need steady hands for that, very steady." The implication hung in the air between them. Marcus felt heat creeping up his neck. "I manage just fine." "I'm sure you do," Elena said evenly. "But this kind of precision work? It's a two-person job at minimum. Even with perfect hands, I'd want someone to help with the alignment while I set the soundpost. It's just common sense." Marcus wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She was right, and they both knew it. He'd been struggling with this repair for days, fighting against his body's limitations, too proud to admit he needed help, too afraid that asking for help would confirm what he'd been terrified to accept, that his career as a luthier might be over. "Look," Elena said, her tone softening. "I know we just met, and you have no reason to trust me, but I need a place to work, and you could use an extra pair of hands, at least for some projects. I'm not trying to take over or anything. I just want to fix instruments. That's all I've ever wanted to do." The rain continued its assault on the windows, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Marcus looked at the Henderson violin, then at the stack of repair orders he'd been putting off, then at Elena's open, honest face. Every instinct told him to say no, to protect what little remained of his pride and independence. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, reminded him of Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter, of the dozen other clients waiting for repairs he couldn't complete alone. "How much experience do you have with soundpost setting?" he heard himself ask. Elena's face lit up. "About 12 years. I apprenticed with a master luthier in Louisville, straight out of high school. Moved to Nashville 5 years ago and worked with a shop that specialized in vintage restorations. I've set hundreds of soundposts, maybe thousands." Marcus walked to a cabinet and pulled out a worn ledger, flipping through pages of repair orders. "I've got 17 violins, 4 violas, and 2 cellos waiting for work. Most of them are beyond my current capacity. If you're serious about renting space, I'll give you a corner of the workshop and access to all the tools. In exchange for rent, you help with repairs when I need it, particularly the detail work." "That's fair," Elena said immediately. "When can I start?" "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. I open early." She extended her hand, and Marcus shook it, trying not to notice how steady her grip was compared to his. "You won't regret this," she said. After she left, Marcus stood alone in the workshop, listening to the rain. The Henderson violin still lay in pieces on his bench, but for the first time in months he felt something other than despair when he looked at it. It might have been hope, it might have been fear, probably both. He locked up the shop and stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella. The water was cold and clean, washing away some of the day's frustration. As he walked toward his apartment 3 blocks away, he passed the coffee shop where his father used to take him after long days in the workshop. The old man had believed that every instrument had a voice waiting to be freed, that their job wasn't to fix what was broken, but to remember what had been whole. Marcus had lost sight of that belief, somewhere between the accident and the endless physical therapy appointments. But maybe, just maybe, Elena Rodriguez and her steady hands could help him find it again. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Henderson. "Any progress on Lily's violin? She's practicing 6 hours a day, really hoping we can have it ready for the audition. She's counting on you." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Making progress. It's going to be ready. I promise." It was the first promise he'd made in months that he actually believed he might be able to keep. Not because of a miracle, but because sometimes help came in the form of a woman in a yellow raincoat, offering her hands when yours weren't enough. The rain followed him home, but Marcus didn't mind. Cincinnati in November was supposed to be wet and cold. It reminded him that seasons changed, that winter didn't last forever, that spring eventually came even when you'd stopped believing in it. Tomorrow, Elena Rodriguez would walk into his workshop, and together they'd attempt to resurrect a 1920s violin that everyone, including himself, had declared beyond repair. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be simple. But maybe, if they were careful and patient and willing to trust each other's expertise, they could create something beautiful from what seemed hopelessly broken. Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, his right hand aching from the day's work. He'd ice it tonight, do his exercises, and be ready for tomorrow. For the first time since the accident, he was actually looking forward to going to the workshop. Not because anything had fundamentally changed, but because for the first time he wasn't facing the work alone. The city lights blurred through his rain-streaked windows as he settled into his routine. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter was practicing, dreaming of conservatory and concert halls. Somewhere, Elena Rodriguez was unpacking boxes in a new apartment, preparing for a fresh start. And here, in a small apartment above a Chinese restaurant, Marcus Chen allowed himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. Maybe it was just beginning. The workshop smelled of coffee and sawdust when Elena arrived at 6:45 the next morning. Marcus was already there, clearing space in the back corner near the window. He'd moved some storage boxes and set up an additional workbench, older than his, but still solid. The gesture surprised her. Despite his agreement the night before, she'd half expected him to have changed his mind by morning. "You're early," he said without turning around. "Always am. Bad habit from my mentor." He said the early hours were when instruments talked the loudest. Elena set down the cardboard box containing her personal tools. "This is perfect, thank you." Marcus finally looked at her, and in the morning light she could see the exhaustion etched more deeply into his features. He'd probably been here since before dawn, preparing the space as a way to avoid confronting how he felt about sharing his workshop. She recognized the tactic. She'd done the same thing when her marriage had fallen apart 2 years ago, throwing herself into 16-hour workdays rather than processing the loss. "Coffee's over there." Marcus gestured toward a small table with an ancient Mr. Coffee machine. "It's terrible, but it's hot." "Terrible and hot describes most of my relationships," Elena said, then immediately regretted the attempt at humor when Marcus just blinked at her. "Sorry, I make jokes when I'm nervous." "Are you nervous? Wouldn't you be, starting over in a new city, working with someone who clearly isn't thrilled about having me here?" She poured herself a cup of the coffee. He was right. It was terrible. "But I meant what I said last night. I just want to work. I'm good at staying out of people's way." Marcus studied her for a moment, then something in his expression softened slightly. "I'm not good at this. The people part. I used to have an apprentice, Jake, good kid, real talent. But after the accident, I got difficult, snapped at him constantly. He stuck around for a few months, trying to help, but I made it miserable for both of us. Eventually, he left for a position in Cleveland. Can't blame him. That was 6 months ago. 4. It took me 2 months after the accident to even come back here. Marcus flexed his right hand unconsciously, and Elena noticed the slight stiffness in the movement. So if I'm short with you, or if I seem ungrateful, it's not about you. It's about me trying to figure out how to do this job with hands that don't work the way they used to. Elena appreciated the honesty, even if it came wrapped in defensive layers. Then let's make a deal. You tell me when you need help, and I'll tell you when I need space. We're both professionals. We can figure this out. Deal. Marcus walked to his main workbench where the Henderson violin lay in state. Want to start with this? Mrs. Henderson called me twice last night asking for updates. Her granddaughter's audition is November 15th. That's 5 weeks from tomorrow. Elena set down her coffee and approached the instrument, pulling on the thin cotton gloves she always wore when handling delicate work. Up close, the damage was even more extensive than she'd thought. The crack along the top plate had created tension fractures in the surrounding wood. The finish was compromised in several places, and the sound post, that critical internal component that transferred vibrations between the top and back plates, had not just fallen, but had actually cracked. We'll need to make a new sound post, she said, thinking aloud. The old one is compromised, and before we can do that, we need to stabilize this crack, which means carefully opening it up, cleaning out any old glue and re-gluing with proper clamping pressure, then refinish those spots, then fit a new bridge and sound post. She looked up at Marcus. This is a week of work, minimum. Maybe 2 if we're careful. Which we have to be. This violin is irreplaceable to the Henderson family. Then let's get started. Elena pulled up a stool. I'll handle the crack stabilization if you want to start carving a new sound post. That way we can work simultaneously. Marcus hesitated, and Elena could see the conflict playing across his face. Letting her take the lead on such delicate work, especially on their first day, meant surrendering control. But arguing would waste time they didn't have. Fine, he said finally. The spruce blanks are in the 3rd drawer down. I'll get the crack measuring calipers. They worked in silence for the first hour, falling into the rhythm that all skilled craftspeople recognize. Elena's hands moved with practiced precision as she carefully worked a thin palette knife along the crack, assessing how deep it went and where the glue had failed. Marcus, at his own bench, measured and marked the spruce blank that would become the new sound post, using digital calipers to ensure accuracy. The morning sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of light through the workshop windows. Outside, Cincinnati was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled past on Vine Street. The cafe next door opened, adding the smell of baking bread to the workshop's wood smoke and varnish aroma. Music drifted from somewhere, maybe a street performer or a car radio, the faint sound of strings playing something classical. "Tell me about Nashville," Marcus said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why'd you leave?" Eleanor didn't look up from her work. "Divorce. My ex-husband is a session musician, great guitar player, terrible at monogamy. When we split, the whole music community kind of, divided. People had to choose sides. It got messy." She paused, using a tiny brush to apply cleaning solution to the crack. "My sister moved here 3 years ago. She's a nurse at UC Medical Center. When things fell apart, she said I should start fresh somewhere new, so here I am. I'm sorry about the divorce." "Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me, honestly. I was so focused on keeping him happy that I'd stopped doing the work I actually loved. Spent 2 years basically running his music shop while he toured. When it ended, I remembered why I got into Luthery in the first place." She finally glanced at him. What about you? How'd you end up running this place? Marcus's jaw tightened, and Eleanor thought he might not answer. But after a moment, he set down his tools and leaned against the bench. My father opened this shop in 1987. He was an immigrant from Taiwan, came over with nothing but a degree in engineering and a hobby of fixing instruments. Started small, built a reputation. I grew up here literally, did my homework in that corner. He pointed to where Elena had set up her workspace. Thought I wanted to be a doctor, went to college for pre-med, but I kept coming back here on weekends and summers, finally admitted that this was what I wanted to do. Your father must have been proud. He was. He's gone now. Heart attack 5 years ago. He was 68, still working 6 days a week. Marcus picked up the spruce blank again, turning it over in his hands. The accident happened when I was delivering a violin to one of his old clients. I keep thinking about how disappointed he'd be if he could see me now. All this training, all this knowledge, and I can barely set a soundpost without my hands shaking. Elena set down her tools and looked at him directly. Can I tell you something? Your father sounds like he was a craftsman. Real craftsmen understand that skills aren't just in your hands. They're in your judgment, your eye, your experience. You know things that most luthiers will never learn. The hand tremor? That's just a technical problem. Technical problems have solutions. Easy to say when your hands work fine. My hands work fine now, Elena corrected gently. But I shattered my left wrist when I was 22. Fell off a ladder in the shop, landed wrong. Doctors said I'd never have full mobility again. Told me to consider a different career. She held up her left hand, flexing the fingers. Took me 18 months of therapy and sheer stubbornness to prove them wrong. I still have reduced grip strength on that side. I've just learned to compensate. Marcus stared at her hand, then met her eyes. You never mentioned that. Why would I? It's not who I am. It's just something that happened. Eleanor returned to the violin. Besides, the best luthiers I've known weren't the ones with perfect technique. They were the ones who understood that every instrument is unique, that sometimes you have to adapt your methods to the specific problem in front of you. That takes wisdom, not just dexterity. They worked through the morning without much more conversation, but the silence felt different now, less defensive, more comfortable. Elena finished cleaning the crack and began the delicate process of applying hide glue, using a syringe to work the adhesive deep into the split wood. Marcus carved the soundpost, his movements careful and measured, occasionally pausing to flex his hand when the tremor became noticeable. At noon, Eleanor's sister called. "How's the first day?" Carmen asked, her voice bright even through the phone. "Good. The workshop is perfect. My new landlord is complicated, but I think we'll work well together." Complicated how? Elena glanced at Marcus, who was across the room, examining bridge blanks. He's dealing with some stuff. Injury, pride, the usual male inability to ask for help. Sounds familiar. Your ex had a PhD in that. This is different. Marcus is genuine, wounded, but genuine. I think underneath all the defensive walls, he's a really good person. Elena surprised herself with the assessment. She'd only known him for less than 24 hours, but something about the way he talked about his father, the care he took with the Henderson violin, even when it frustrated him, suggested depths beneath the prickly surface. Well, be careful. You have a tendency to want to fix broken things. I'm a luthier, Carmen. That's literally my job description. You know what I mean? People aren't instruments. Elena did know what she meant. Her marriage had failed partly because she'd spent more energy trying to repair her ex-husband than addressing their fundamental incompatibility. But this was different. She and Marcus were colleagues, not romantic partners. Professional boundaries would keep things clear. After lunch, they began the clamping process. This required both of them working in careful coordination. Elena positioned the spool clamps along the crack, while Marcus monitored the pressure, making sure they weren't distorting the instrument's arch. It was delicate work that demanded communication and trust. "A little more on the center clamp," Marcus said, watching the crack close. "That's it. Perfect. How's the arch looking?" "Good. Hold it there while I add the next one." They worked in tandem, their movements becoming synchronized as they focused on the shared goal. Elena found herself appreciating Marcus's precision and knowledge. He might struggle with fine motor control, but his understanding of violin construction was encyclopedic. He could see problems before they developed and adjust their approach accordingly. "You're good at this," she said, as they finished setting the last clamp. "At what? Watching you do the hard part? At knowing what needs to happen? At seeing the whole picture? That's rarer than good hands, trust me." Elena stepped back to examine their work. The crack was closed perfectly, invisible except for the slight color difference where the old finish had been disturbed. "We make a good team." Marcus looked at the violin, then at Elena, and for the first time since they'd met, he smiled. It was small and tentative, but genuine. "Yeah, maybe we do." The Henderson violin would need to sit clamped for at least 24 hours while the glue cured. They moved on to other repairs. A cello that needed new tuning pegs, a viola with a loose neck joint. Elena worked on refinishing the small area around the crack, matching the amber varnish to the surrounding finish. Marcus fitted the tuning pegs, his hands moving more steadily now that some of the day's tension had eased. The afternoon faded into evening. The autumn sun set early this time of year, painting the workshop in shades of gold and shadow. Elena found herself not wanting to leave, even though her new apartment was calling with its boxes needing unpacking. There was something peaceful about this space, about the shared focus on creation and repair. "You can come in tomorrow if you want," Marcus said as she packed up her things. "To check on the violin. I'll be here at 7. Make it 6:30. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Elena smiled. "See you at 6:30. She stepped out into the cool Cincinnati evening, pulling her jacket tight against the November wind. The city was alive with Friday night energy, people heading to restaurants and bars, couples walking hand in hand, the normal rhythm of urban life. She felt an unexpected surge of optimism. This move might actually work out, not just the job, but the whole fresh start she'd been hoping for. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Dinner tomorrow? Want to hear all about this complicated workshop landlord?" Elena texted back, "You're impossible, but yes to dinner." As she walked toward her car, she thought about Marcus's smile, brief as it had been. There was a good person under all that hurt and defensiveness. Someone who cared deeply about his craft and his clients. Someone who just needed to remember that asking for help wasn't the same as admitting defeat. She'd help him remember that, not because she was trying to fix him, but because that's what colleagues did for each other. They filled in each other's gaps, supported each other's weaknesses, celebrated each other's strengths. Tomorrow they'd remove the clamps and begin the next phase of the restoration. And somehow, Elena suspected, they'd both be a little bit better at this strange new partnership they were building. One careful step at a time, one repaired crack at a time, one shared moment of understanding at a time. It wasn't a miracle. It was just two skilled people learning to trust each other. But sometimes that was more than enough. 3 weeks into their partnership, the Henderson violin was nearly complete. The crack repair had held perfectly, invisible under Elena's expert refinishing. The new soundpost stood proud and true, fitted with a precision that Marcus had to admit exceeded what he could have managed alone. Now, on a grey Wednesday morning, they were ready for the final and most critical step, setting up the instrument to play. "Bridge blank?" Elena asked, holding out her hand without looking up from where she was examining the violin's top plate under magnification. Marcus selected a maple bridge blank from his collection, choosing one with the right grain pattern and thickness. French maple, medium grain, should be perfect for this instrument. Let's hope so. Mrs. Henderson called again yesterday. 3 times. Elena finally looked up, pushing her glasses higher on her nose. Her granddaughter is apparently having anxiety dreams about the audition. No pressure or anything. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past weeks. Marcus arrived first each morning, starting coffee and reviewing the day's work plan. Eleanor followed within minutes, usually carrying breakfast from the cafe next door. They'd discovered a shared love of practical problem-solving and a mutual intolerance for inefficiency. Arguments were frequent but productive, if focused on technical approaches rather than personal conflicts. The workshop had changed too. Elena's corner was now fully integrated, her tools mingling with Marcus's on shared benches. They'd reorganized the space for better workflow, moving the finishing station closer to the windows for natural light, consolidating the storage to free up more working area. The place felt alive again, purposeful in a way it hadn't since before the accident. Marcus began carefully carving the bridge, shaping the maple to match the violin's measurements. This was delicate work that required absolute precision. The bridge had to be the exact height to achieve proper string tension, with feet shaped to perfectly match the arch of the top plate. Too high, and the instrument would be difficult to play. Too low, and the sound would suffer. His right hand cramped after the first few minutes. Marcus paused, flexing his fingers, fighting back the familiar frustration. "Want me to take over?" Elena asked, not looking up from her own work. "No, I can do this part." He picked up the knife again, determined. The therapy exercises had been helping. He'd regained some fine motor control, though it still wasn't what it used to be. But Elena was right. Adaptation was possible. He'd learned to modify his grip, to take more frequent breaks, to use different tools when the traditional ones didn't work. "Coffee's getting cold," Elena said after another few minutes. Marcus realized she was giving him an out, a graceful way to take a break without admitting he needed one. He set down the knife. "Yeah, probably should drink it before it gets worse than it already is." They moved to the small table by the coffee maker, a habit they'd developed during long restoration projects. These breaks had become unexpectedly valuable, moments where they'd share stories about past projects, difficult clients, or the peculiarities of their craft. "I got an email from Jake yesterday," Marcus said, surprising himself with the admission. "My former apprentice. He wanted to know how I was doing." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I'm managing, that I have help now." Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I apologized for how I treated him. Should have done it months ago." Elena smiled. "That must have felt good. Felt necessary. He deserved better than what he got from me." Marcus glanced at her. "You've been patient with me these past weeks, more patient than I've earned." "Oh, I don't know about that. You've only yelled at me, what, twice? Maybe 3 times? 4 times, but who's counting?" They both laughed, and Marcus realized how much lighter he felt lately. The constant anxiety that had plagued him since the accident hadn't disappeared, but it had eased. Having Eleanor to share the workload meant he could focus on the aspects he was still good at: design, problem-solving, client relations, while she handled the fine detail work that his hands struggled with. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Why do you do this? I mean, you could have gone into engineering like your dad wanted, could have made more money, had an easier life. Why choose this?" Marcus thought about the question. "My father used to say that every violin has a voice, but it takes someone who listens to help it sing. I used to think that was just poetic nonsense. But the first time I completed a major restoration, when I handed it back to the owner and they played that first note," he paused, remembering, I understood what he meant. It's not just about fixing wood and glue. It's about preserving something that can create beauty, that can move people. There's meaning in that. There is, Elena agreed softly. That's why I couldn't stay away either. Money's terrible, hours are worse, but the work matters. They returned to their benches, and Marcus picked up the bridge blank with renewed focus. His hand still cramped, still trembled occasionally, but he pushed through, taking breaks when needed, accepting Elena's help when his limitations became clear. By late morning, the bridge was shaped and ready for final fitting. "Want to do the honors?" he asked Elena. She shook her head. "You've been working on this project from the beginning. You should be the one to set it up." Marcus carefully positioned the bridge on the violin's top plate, adjusting it until the feet matched the arch perfectly. Then came the soundpost adjustment, the most critical aspect of tonal setup. Even a millimeter's difference in soundpost position could dramatically affect the instrument's voice. Elena handed him the soundpost setter, a specialized tool with a sharp tip for moving the spruce post through the F-hole. Marcus's hands weren't steady enough for this work anymore, and they both knew it. "Together," Elena suggested. "You position, I'll stabilize." It was a compromise that preserved his dignity while acknowledging reality. Marcus guided the soundpost setter while Eleanor supported his hand, her steady grip compensating for his tremor. Slowly, carefully, they positioned the soundpost under the bridge, adjusting and readjusting until it was exactly right. "There," Marcus said finally, withdrawing the setter. "That's it." They strung the violin with new strings, bringing it up to pitch gradually to avoid shocking the newly repaired structure. The final moment came when Marcus lifted the completed instrument and drew the bow across the strings for the first time. The sound that emerged was clear and resonant, with a warm depth that suggested the violin's vintage quality. Not perfect yet, new setups always needed adjustment, but undeniably alive. The Henderson violin was singing again. Elena's eyes brightened. "Listen to that G string. Beautiful. The E is a little bright. We'll need to adjust the soundpost slightly forward." "Agreed. But Marcus..." She met his eyes. "We did it. Even a miracle won't fix this, you said. But we fixed it." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, relief, certainly, but also something deeper. The recognition that he hadn't accomplished this alone, and that was okay. That needing help didn't make him less of a craftsman. It just made him human. "We fixed it," he repeated, "together." The word felt significant, weighted with meaning beyond this single repair. Mrs. Henderson arrived that afternoon, her face anxious as she entered the workshop. She was a small woman in her 70s, with silver hair and hands that showed years of her own musical practice. "Is it ready?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Marcus lifted the violin from its case, now clean and restored, its amber varnish glowing in the afternoon light. "See for yourself." Mrs. Henderson took the instrument with trembling hands, examining it closely. The crack was invisible, the finish was perfect. She positioned it under her chin and played a few scales, then a passage from a Bach partita. The sound filled the workshop, bright and clear and full of character. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes. "It sounds even better than I remembered. How did you... I thought you said it was impossible." "I had help," Marcus said simply, gesturing toward Elena. "This is Elena Rodriguez. She's the one who made this possible." "We both did," Elena corrected. "Marcus's knowledge and my hands. Team effort." Mrs. Henderson set the violin down carefully and pulled out her checkbook. "Whatever the bill is, it's not enough. This violin, it's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother brought it from Germany to have it restored so beautifully. She wrote the check with shaking hands and pressed it into Marcus's palm. "Thank you, both of you. Lily is going to be over the moon." After she left, Marcus looked at the check and then at Elena. It was more than he'd quoted, significantly more. Mrs. Henderson had added a generous tip. "We should celebrate," Elena said. "This was a major project. We earned a victory dinner." Marcus hesitated. In the weeks they'd worked together, their relationship had remained strictly professional. Lunch breaks at the workshop, focused conversations about instruments and technique. Going to dinner felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure he was ready to cross. But Elena was already pulling on her jacket, her expression expectant. "Come on. There's a great Italian place on Short Vine. My sister recommended it. My treat, since you're probably going to argue about paying." I wasn't going to argue. "Yes, you were. You're predictable that way." They ended up at Bella Luna, a small restaurant with red check tablecloths and the smell of garlic and basil heavy in the air. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they talked about everything except work. Elena told him about growing up in Knoxville, about her father's construction business and her mother's garden. Marcus shared stories about his childhood in Cincinnati, about learning English and Mandarin simultaneously, about the summer he'd spent in Taiwan visiting his father's family. "Do you miss it?" Elena asked. "Taiwan? Sometimes. It's part of my heritage, but I've never felt fully connected to it. My dad tried to teach me the culture, the language, but I always felt caught between worlds. Not quite American enough for some people, not quite Chinese enough for others. I get that. Being Latina in the South had its own challenges. People making assumptions based on my last name or appearance." Elena twirled pasta around her fork. "But I think that in-between space can be powerful. You see both cultures clearly because you're not entirely immersed in either one." "Maybe. Or maybe you just end up not belonging anywhere. You belong in that workshop. You belong in your craft." Elena met his eyes. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you took a chance on me. These past few weeks have been some of the best working days I've had in years." Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the wine. "I'm glad too. I didn't want to admit I needed help, but you were right. Some things are better done together." They lingered over dessert, talking until the restaurant started putting chairs up on empty tables. When they finally left, the November night was cold and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "Thank you for dinner," Marcus said as they reached Elena's car. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Elena smiled. "See you tomorrow, 6:30. He watched her drive away, then walked slowly back to his apartment. The city felt different tonight, less isolating, more full of possibility. The Henderson restoration had been a turning point, he realized. Not just for the violin, but for him. He'd proven to himself that he could still do this work, even with his limitations. That his career wasn't over, just different than he'd planned. And Elena had become more than just a colleague. She was becoming a friend, maybe. Someone who understood not just the technical aspects of their work, but the emotional weight of it. The way that fixing instruments could feel like fixing pieces of yourself. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "Forgot to tell you. We got 3 new repair requests today. 2 violins and a viola. Business is picking up." Marcus smiled as he typed back, "We can handle it." We. Such a small word, but it carried so much weight. For months he'd been alone with his injury and his fear and his failing business. Now there was someone else sharing the burden, someone whose skill complemented his own, someone who made him believe that maybe he hadn't lost everything after all. The workshop tomorrow would smell like coffee and sawdust. Elena would arrive with breakfast from the cafe. They'd argue about the best approach for the new repairs, then find a compromise that worked. The work would be challenging and satisfying and meaningful. Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, his right hand aching from the day's work, but his heart lighter than it had been in months. The Henderson violin was fixed. His business was recovering. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, he'd found hope again, not through a miracle, but through simple human connection, through trust, collaboration, and the willingness to accept help when it was offered. Sometimes that was the biggest miracle of all. The morning of Lily Henderson's audition arrived with typical Cincinnati December weather. Grey skies promising snow and temperatures hovering just above freezing. Marcus stood in the workshop at 5 a.m., earlier than usual, checking the Henderson violin one final time. He'd asked Mrs. Henderson to bring Lily by before the audition so they could make any last-minute adjustments, and he wanted everything perfect. Elena arrived at 5:30, carrying 2 large coffees and looking surprisingly awake. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Kept thinking about the setup. What if the soundpost shifted during transport? What if the bridge needs adjustment? Then we'll fix it. That's what we do." Elena set the coffees down and examined the violin herself. "It's perfect, Marcus. Stop worrying." But Marcus couldn't stop. This audition represented more than just a student's opportunity. It was validation that he could still do the work that mattered, that his injury hadn't ended his career. Lily's success would be his success too. The Hendersons arrived at 6:30. Lily was 17, tall and nervous, with her grandmother's eyes and trembling hands. She wore a formal concert dress despite the early hour, her hair pulled back severely, looking far older than her years. "Thank you for seeing us so early," Mrs. Henderson said. "Lily wanted to make sure everything was ready." "Let's hear how it sounds," Marcus said gently, handing the violin to Lily. The girl took the instrument with obvious reverence, positioning it carefully under her chin. She played a few scales, then launched into the opening of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, her audition piece. The music filled the workshop, technically precise, but stiff with anxiety. When she finished, Marcus exchanged glances with Elena. The violin setup was fine, but the player needed reassurance. "The instrument sounds beautiful," Marcus said. "How does it feel to you?" "It's perfect, better than perfect." Lily's voice was tight. "I'm just so nervous. What if I mess up? What if my fingers slip on the fingerboard? What if you remember why you love playing?" Elena interrupted softly, stepping forward. "Your grandmother told us you practice 6 hours a day. Nobody does that unless they genuinely love music. So today, don't think about the judges or the conservatory. Just think about the music, about what you want to say with it." Lily looked at Eleanor, then at the violin in her hands. "This was my great-grandmother's. She played in a small orchestra in Berlin before the war. Then she came to America and had to start over, working in a factory. But she kept this violin, kept playing in church. She said music was the one thing nobody could take from her." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "I want to honor that. I want to be good enough." "You are good enough," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "And you have her violin, restored and ready. You have everything you need." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. This was why the work mattered. Not just the technical craft, but the stories behind every instrument, the connections between generations, the way music could carry meaning across decades and continents. "Play it again," he said to Lily. "But this time, play it for your great-grandmother, not for the judges." Lily positioned the violin again. This time, when she played, the music was different, still technically precise, but warmer, more expressive. The stiffness was gone, replaced by genuine emotion. When she finished, everyone in the workshop stood in silence for a moment. "That's it," Elena said quietly. "That's the performance you need to give." The Hendersons left shortly after, Lily clutching the violin case like a lifeline, Mrs. Henderson's arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. Marcus and Elena watched them go, then looked at each other. "Think she'll get in?" Elena asked. She deserves to. The rest is up to her. They returned to their respective benches, but the day felt different somehow, charged with possibility and meaning. Marcus found himself thinking about all the instruments that had passed through this workshop over the years. His father had restored hundreds, maybe thousands, each one with its own story, its own purpose. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said suddenly. "I've been thinking about expanding, actually hiring you officially, not just as a renter, maybe even taking on another apprentice eventually, building this into something bigger." Eleanor looked up, surprise evident on her face. "Really? What changed?" "You did. Working with you these past 2 months made me remember why I got into this field, and it made me realize I don't have to do everything alone, that having partners, collaborators, people who bring different skills, that makes the work better, not worse." "I'd like that," Elena said, her smile bright. "Being official partners, though you're still making terrible coffee. That's non-negotiable. Terrible coffee is part of the workshop's charm." They worked through the morning on routine repairs, but Marcus's mind kept drifting to the future. What would the workshop look like with 2 full-time luthiers? Could they take on more complex restorations, maybe develop a specialty in vintage instruments? The possibilities felt endless in a way they hadn't since before the accident. His phone rang just after noon. Mrs. Henderson's number. "She got in," the woman said without preamble, her voice choked with tears. "Lily got into the conservatory. Full scholarship. They said her audition was extraordinary, that she played with rare emotional maturity. She said the violin sang for her. Marcus, thank you. Thank you for giving us back our family's voice." After hanging up, Marcus stood still for a long moment, letting the news sink in. Then he turned to Elena, who was watching with obvious curiosity. "Lily got in, full scholarship." Elena's face broke into a huge smile. "That's amazing. We should celebrate again, properly this time." "Agreed, but first, you'd—" Marcus walked to his desk and pulled out a folder. "I've been working on something. Partnership papers, equal ownership, profit sharing, all official. If you're serious about staying in Cincinnati, about building this business together, I want it to be real." Elena took the folder, scanning the documents inside. Her eyes widened. "Marcus, this is incredibly generous. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. You saved this business. You saved me, honestly. I was drowning, too proud to admit I needed help. You showed me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." "Then yes, absolutely yes." Elena extended her hand, then laughed and pulled him into a hug instead. Partners, equal partners. They spent the afternoon discussing plans. Elena had ideas about expanding their online presence, maybe starting a YouTube channel, showcasing restoration techniques. Marcus wanted to develop relationships with more music schools, building a pipeline of young musicians who'd become lifelong clients. Together, they mapped out a vision that excited both of them. As evening approached, snow began to fall outside the workshop windows. Fat, lazy flakes that accumulated on the sills and sidewalks, transforming Cincinnati into a winter postcard. Elena pulled on her yellow raincoat, her defense against all weather, and paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for taking a chance on me. I know it wasn't easy. Thank you for being patient with a stubborn, injured, prideful craftsman who didn't know what he needed. You knew. You just needed time to accept it." Elena smiled. "See you tomorrow, partner." After she left, Marcus remained in the workshop, watching the snow fall and thinking about the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd been alone and afraid, convinced his career was over. He'd looked at the Henderson violin and declared it beyond repair, impossible to fix. "Even a miracle won't fix this," he'd said, But it hadn't taken a miracle. It had taken skill, patience, collaboration, and the willingness to accept help. Elena's hands had done what his couldn't, but his knowledge had guided the work. Together, they'd created something neither could have managed alone. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake, his former apprentice. "I heard about the Henderson restoration. Sounds amazing. Would love to visit sometime, see what you and your new partner are working on." Marcus typed back, "Come anytime. Would be good to see you." The conversation felt like closing a circle, making amends with the past, while building toward the future. Marcus had spent months being angry at his injury, at his limitations, at the unfairness of losing his fine motor control. But maybe, he thought now, maybe that loss had created space for something else. For growth, for partnership, for a different kind of success. He locked up the workshop and stepped out into the falling snow. The city was quiet, muffled by the weather, peaceful in a way that Cincinnati rarely managed. Marcus walked home slowly, letting the flakes accumulate on his jacket and hair, in no hurry to escape the cold. His right hand ached, as it always did by day's end. The tremor was worse in cold weather. But he flexed his fingers, did his exercises, and felt grateful. These hands might not work the way they used to, but they still worked. They still created, still contributed, still mattered. And now they had Elena's hands working alongside them. Together they'd fixed the Henderson violin, launched Lily toward her dreams, and rebuilt a struggling business. Tomorrow they'd start on new projects, new challenges, new instruments waiting to be restored. Marcus's apartment building came into view, its windows glowing warm against the winter darkness. Inside, he'd make dinner, review the partnership papers one more time, maybe call his aunt in Taiwan and tell her the good news. His father would have liked Elena, Marcus thought, would have appreciated her skill and directness, and the way she'd pushed Marcus to be better without ever making him feel inadequate. "Every violin has a voice," his father used to say. "It takes someone who listens to help it sing." Marcus understood now that the same was true for people. Everyone had a voice, a purpose, something unique to contribute. But sometimes you needed help finding it, expressing it, letting it resonate. Sometimes you needed someone else's hands to supplement your own. Someone else's skills to complement yours, someone else's belief to overcome your doubt. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, his heart full, in a way it hadn't been since before the accident. The future was uncertain, as futures always were, but it was also bright with possibility. The workshop would thrive. Elena would continue bringing her creativity and skill to their shared space. New projects would challenge them, push them to grow, remind them why they'd chosen this difficult, beautiful profession. And somewhere in Cincinnati, a 17-year-old girl was probably still clutching her great-grandmother's violin, barely believing that her dreams were coming true. That restoration had made it possible. Marcus and Elena's collaboration had made it possible. Not a miracle, just two skilled people working together, each contributing what they could, compensating for each other's limitations. Marcus made tea and sat by the window, watching the snow transform his neighborhood. The year was ending. In a few weeks, it would be a new year, a fresh start, a clean page. But really, the fresh start had begun 2 months ago, when Elena Rodriguez walked into his workshop in a yellow raincoat, offering her hands when his weren't enough. "Even a miracle won't fix this," he'd said, staring at the broken Henderson violin. But her hands had proved him wrong, not through magic or divine intervention, but through skill, patience, and the simple human act of showing up and offering help. Through the willingness to work together, to trust each other, to build something better than either could create alone. That was the real miracle, Marcus realized. Not the violin's restoration, but the restoration of his hope, his belief that he could continue doing the work he loved, his understanding that asking for help wasn't defeat, it was wisdom. The snow continued falling, covering Cincinnati in white, making everything clean and new. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new instruments, new opportunities to create beauty from brokenness. But tonight, Marcus Chen sat in his apartment and felt genuinely grateful for everything that had brought him to this moment, for the injury that had forced him to change, for Elena's arrival at exactly the right time, for the Henderson violin and the lesson it had taught him, for Hans, his own imperfect ones and Eleanor's skilled ones, working together to create something neither could manage alone. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The end.